Clarence Carter recorded a song that almost every radio station in America refused to play. Program directors banned it. Stations that did play it got phone calls. Some disc jockeys were warned that if they spun it again, they would be looking for new work. And yet that song went on to sell more than 1.5 million copies, almost entirely from jukeboxes in bars and clubs and roadhouses across the South where no program director could stop it. The man who made that record could not see a single one of those jukeboxes. He had been blind since he was 1 year old. His name was Clarence Carter, and the story of how a blind kid from Montgomery, Alabama became the man who recorded the most defiant, the most joyful, and the most banned song in the history of soul music is far stranger and far better than anything the tabloids ever invented about him. Clarence Carter died on May 13th of this year at the age of 90, and in the days after his passing you saw the same handful of facts repeated everywhere. Blind soul singer, sang that song you cannot play at a wedding without your aunt covering her ears. Married Candy Staten once a long time ago. But those few lines do not even begin to cover it. Because the truth about Clarence Carter is that he was one of the most quietly brilliant figures the Muscle Shoals sound ever produced. A man who turned a lifetime of being underestimated into a career that lasted more than 60 years. So tonight, let us slow down and tell it properly from the beginning. Clarence George Carter was born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1936. He lost his sight as an infant before he was old enough to form a single visual memory of the world. He would later say that he never thought of himself as having lost anything, because you cannot miss what you never had the chance to know. What he had instead was sound. And in the South in the 1940s and 50s, sound was everywhere. It was in the church on Sunday morning. It was on the radio late at night when the gospel programs gave way to the blues. It was in the voices of the people all around him. A blind child in that time and that place had two roads in front of him, and most people expected him to take the safe one. Clarence Carter took the other one. He enrolled at the Alabama School for the Blind, and it was there that he first learned music in a formal way. He learned to read music in Braille, running his fingers across the raised dots to understand harmony and structure in a way that many sighted musicians never bothered to learn at all. He picked up the guitar, and here is one of the small telling details of his life that the obituaries tend to skip right past. Clarence Carter went on to study at Alabama State College, where he earned a degree in music in 1960. A blind black man in Alabama at the end of the 1950s walking across a stage with a college degree in music. That fact alone tells you something about the size of the will inside this man. But a degree does not pay the rent, and it certainly does not make you a star. For a while, Clarence Carter performed as part of a duo. He teamed up with another blind musician named Calvin Scott, and the two of them billed themselves as Clarence and Calvin. They were sometimes called the C&C Boys. They cut a few records that went nowhere in particular. They played the small circuit, the clubs and the lounges, the kind of places where you are background noise until the moment you make somebody stop and listen. It was honest work, but it was not the future. The future was about 90 minutes to the northwest, in a little town in the corner of Alabama, in a recording studio that was about to change American music forever. That town was Muscle Shoals, and the studio was called Fame. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what Fame Studios was. In the 1960s, a man named Rick Hall built a recording operation in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, that produced a sound unlike anything else in the country. It was raw and it was warm and it was deeply, unmistakably Southern. Part of what made that sound so singular was the house band, a group of session players who would eventually become famous as the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section, sometimes called the Swampers. Jimmy Johnson on guitar, David Hood on bass, Roger Hawkins on drums, Barry Beckett on keys. These four men played on records that shook the world, and for a while, almost nobody outside the industry even knew their names. They were the engine underneath some of the greatest soul recordings ever made. Percy Sledge cut When a Man Loves a Woman in that room, the record that first put Muscle Shoals on the map for the rest of the world. Aretha Franklin walked through those doors and made sessions that became the stuff of legend. Wilson Pickett recorded there. And into that world walked Clarence Carter, a blind singer and guitar player with a college degree, a deep speaking voice, and a laugh that could fill a room. Rick Hall heard something in him, and in the second half of the 1960s, Clarence Carter began making the records that would establish him as a genuine star of Southern soul. It is also worth knowing that Carter was not just a performer in that studio. He was a songwriter of real consequence. He wrote a song called Tell Daddy, and when Etta James got hold of it and recorded it as Tell Mama, it became one of the great records of the entire era, a stone classic that people are still playing today. That is the kind of songwriter Clarence Carter was. He gave hits away to other people and still had enough left over to build a career of his own. The first record under his own name to really break through came in 1968. The song was called Slip Away, released through Atlantic Records with Jerry Wexler's fingerprints on the distribution that got it to the country. It was a slow, aching, grown-up record about a man and a woman who cannot be together openly, stealing what little time they can. Slip Away climbed all the way to number 6 on the national pop chart and to number 2 on the rhythm and blues chart. More than half a century later, that song has been streamed tens of millions of times, and it is turned up in Hollywood films, in The Commitments, and Almost Famous, and Licorice Pizza. It is the kind of record that outlives everybody who first heard it on the radio. But Slip Away was only the warm-up, because in 1970, Clarence Carter recorded the song that would become his signature, the one that would still be played at family cookouts half a century later. That song was called Patches. Now, Patches is a remarkable piece of work, and it is worth pausing on because it shows you the side of Clarence Carter that the jokes about his later music completely erase. Patches is a story song. It is about a poor boy growing up on a farm in Alabama, the oldest of the children, and how, when his father falls sick and dies, the father's last words lay the whole weight of the family down on the boy's young shoulders. Take care of your mother, take care of the family now. It is the kind of song that, if you are not careful, will catch you off guard in the car and put a lump in your throat before you even realize what is happening. Clarence Carter delivered it with this plain-spoken, almost conversational dignity, never over-singing it, just telling you the story like a man who had lived something very close to it. Patches went to number 4 on the national pop chart and to number 2 over in the United Kingdom. It sold more than 1 million copies, and in 1971, it won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Song. A blind man from Montgomery, Alabama, holding a Grammy. Let that one settle for a moment, because it is the high point of the first act of his career, and it makes everything that came afterwards so much more interesting than people give it credit for. It was during this stretch, right at the peak, that the most talked about chapter of Clarence Carter's personal life unfolded. Because around this time, Clarence Carter met a young singer named Candy Staton. If you do not know Candy Staton by name, you almost certainly know her voice. She is the woman who sang Young Hearts Run Free, one of the defining records of the entire disco era, a song that is still pulling in enormous numbers to this very day. She would later become a towering figure in gospel music as well. Candy Staton is by any measure a legend in her own right, and as of this recording, she is still very much with us in her 80s and was even nominated for a Grammy again earlier this year. She is not a footnote in Clarence Carter's story. If anything, he is a chapter in hers. Here's what actually happened between them, told straight without the embellishment. Candy Staton was singing in a group when Clarence Carter first heard her, and it was Clarence Carter himself who brought her to Rick Hall at Fame Studios, the introduction that effectively launched her recording career. Think about that for a second. Whatever else passed between these two people, the very first thing Clarence Carter did was open a door for her. The two of them grew close, and in 1970 they married. They were, for a few short years, one of the power couples of Southern soul, two enormous talents under a single roof. But it did not last. The marriage was a turbulent one, and by all honest accounts, the strain came largely from Clarence Carter's own restlessness, his wandering, the temptations that come with a life lived out on the road for a man at the very height of his fame. They divorced in 1973. The whole marriage had lasted only about 3 years. And here is the part that I think is genuinely beautiful, and that gets lost entirely when people try to reduce this down to gossip. Out of that heartbreak, Candy Staton made art. The end of that marriage gave her some of the richest material of her early career, and the two of them remained creatively entangled long after the marriage itself was over. Clarence Carter had a hand in writing some of her finest songs. Their professional lives stayed braided together even as their personal one came apart at the seams. Soul music is full of these stories, two people who could not make a life together but who made unforgettable records in the trying and in the failing. The story of Clarence Carter and Candy Staten is one of the great bittersweet chapters of that whole era. It is not a scandal, it is a love story that did not work out between two people who turned the wreckage of it into music. And when Clarence Carter died this spring, it was Candy Staten's own representative who helped confirm the news to the world. More than 50 years after the divorce, that connection had never fully broken. Now, we have to talk about the song. You know the one. By the middle of the 1970s, the hits had slowed down for Clarence Carter, the way they slowed down for almost everybody eventually. The disco era was reshaping the whole landscape of black music, and the kind of gritty southern soul that Clarence Carter made was for a while simply out of fashion. A lesser man might have faded away quietly. Clarence Carter did something else entirely, and it is worth noting that even in the lean years he kept recording and kept finding audiences in unexpected ways. One of those records was a Christmas novelty called Backdoor Santa, a sly, knowing little blues number that to this day gets pulled out every December and passed around all over again, racking up streams that would have seemed impossible to count back when he first cut it. The man had a gift for songs that refused to stay in their own era. But the real reinvention came in 1986, more than 15 years after Patches, when he recorded a song that would hand him an entire second life. That song was called Stroking. If you have heard Stroking, you are smiling right now, and you know exactly why every radio station in America refused to touch it. It is a blues song about, well, it is a song about what a grown man does with a grown woman behind a closed bedroom door, described in language that leaves absolutely nothing, and I do mean nothing, to the imagination. It is funny, it is filthy, and it is delivered with that same warm conversational ease that Clarence Carter brought to everything, except this time he is asking you what your name is and telling you in great detail exactly how he likes it. Radio would not play it. Radio could not play it. There was no edited version clean enough to save. He released it on Ichiban Records, an independent southern label that had no illusions about getting it onto top 40 playlists, and that turned out to be exactly the right home for it. And here is the genius of it, the thing that makes Clarence Carter such a fascinating figure to me. The band did not kill the song, the band made the song, because Stroking went straight onto the jukeboxes. And bars and clubs and juke joints all across the South, people fed quarters into those machines to play it again and again, laughing, dancing, scandalizing the table right next to them. Stroking sold more than 1.5 million copies almost entirely on jukebox and club play, with virtually no help from radio at all. It became, against every written rule of the music business, one of the most beloved party records in the entire Southern catalog. To this very day, you cannot get through a certain kind of cookout or a certain kind of wedding reception in the South without somebody putting it on and somebody else pretending to be offended. And in case you think that the only people who ever appreciated Stroking were folks 3 drinks deep at a Saturday night fish fry, consider this. The legendary film director William Friedkin, the man who made The Exorcist and The French Connection, was a genuine devoted fan of the song. Friedkin called Stroking one of the great American songs, and he called Clarence Carter the Mozart of Southern music. The Mozart of Southern music, from the director of The Exorcist, about a song you are not allowed to play on the radio. If that single fact does not capture the beautiful contradiction at the heart of Clarence Carter, then I honestly do not know what would. That is the thing people miss about him. The same artist who could make you weep with Patches could make you blush with Stroking, and he did both with the exact same set of tools, that deep, easy conversational voice and that knowing laugh. He understood something that a lot of more respectable artists never figured out in their entire careers. He understood that joy and sorrow live right next door to each other, and that a real entertainer keeps the keys to both houses on the same ring. He flatly refused to be only one thing. The world wanted to file the blind, gospel-trained, Grammy-winning soul man under serious and respectable, and Clarence Carter looked at that filing cabinet and recorded the raunchiest song in America instead, and then sold 1.5 million copies of it on his own terms. Without a single radio station's permission, he never stopped working. For decades after Stroking, Clarence Carter kept touring, kept playing, kept that connection with the audiences who loved him. He became a fixture of the Southern soul and blues circuit, the kind of artist whose shows were less like concerts and more like family reunions. People did not come out to hear a museum piece. They came because Clarence Carter could still command a room, still make them laugh, still slip in the slip away and break their hearts wide open, and then turn right around and play the dirty one and put it all back together again. He worked the way a man works when the work is not a job but a calling. The blindness never slowed it down. If anything, it had only ever sharpened the gift. Clarence Carter passed away on May 13, 2026 in the Atlanta area at the age of 90. As is often the case with private people, the details of his final illness were reported in slightly different ways by different outlets. Some accounts, including word that came by way of his ex-wife Candy Staton's own spokesman, described his passing as the result of natural causes. Other reputable accounts, including reporting confirmed by the president of Fame Studios, described a battle in his final months with advanced prostate cancer, along with complications including pneumonia. What every single account agrees on is the simple, heavy fact of it. After 90 years, after more than 6 decades in music, after the Grammy and the band and the million-selling records he could never see, Clarence Carter was gone. So what do we make of a life like that one? I think the temptation with a figure like Clarence Carter is to remember him for the easy thing, for the novelty, for the dirty song you giggle about. And the dirty song is glorious, and it has more than earned its place. But if that is all you take away from this man, then you have been shortchanged, and so is he. Because the fuller truth is this: Clarence Carter was a blind child in segregation-era Alabama who was expected by very nearly everyone around him to settle for very little. And instead he learned to read music with his fingertips, earned himself a college degree, walked into the greatest soul studio in the country, played alongside the Swampers, won a Grammy, wrote songs that became classics for other people, helped launch the career of a woman who became a legend in her own right. And then, when the industry tried to put him out to pasture, reinvented himself one more time and sold over 1 million copies of a record that the entire radio establishment in America had banned outright. And he did every bit of that without ever once seeing a stage, a chart, an award, or a single face in the crowds that loved him. He took every limitation the world handed him, and he simply declined to accept the terms. They said a blind man could not have a career in music. He had one for 60 years. They said a serious artist could not also be a cut-up, and a Grammy winner could not also make a record too dirty for the airwaves. He did both, on the same voice, with the same laugh, and made you love him all the more for it. They said the hits were over. He went and made the biggest cult record of his entire life at the age of 50. That is not the story of a novelty act. That is the story of one of the most quietly stubborn, quietly brilliant survivors that American music has ever produced. The Mozart of Southern music, a man called him once. I think the better way to say it is this: Clarence Carter spent 90 years proving that the people who underestimate you are the very ones who end up dancing to your song, whether the radio ever gives them permission to or not. Rest easy, Clarence. We hear you. We always did. If this story moved you, or if it taught you something you did not know about a man you thought you already had figured out, take a moment to let us know down below. Tell us in the comments which Clarence Carter song means the most to you. Was it Patches, the one that gets you every single time? Was it Slip Away? Or was it Let Us Be Honest with Each Other, the one we are not allowed to name on this channel? Whatever it is, share it, because the very best way to keep a man like Clarence Carter alive is to keep his music playing. And if you appreciate the kind of stories we tell here, the real ones about the legends who built the music you grew up on, then consider subscribing so that the next one finds its way to you. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep the good songs playing.